Hello and thanks for joining us for another edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Mitchell Ringos. The number of fatal collisions in the Northwest region has quadrupled compared to last year, according to recent statistics from the OPP. There's also been an overall increase in fatalities across the province, but the rise has been particularly dramatic in this region. Lee Noonan has the details.
OPP say they are very concerned by a sharp increase in the number of fatal collisions in the region. 14 people have died in 11 crashes between January and June 15th. Last year, the region saw 4 deaths stemming from 3 collisions over the same period.
Any fatalities on our roads is too many. We want that number to be 0. So that's why we're here reminding members of the public, people traveling on our highways, that these things such as the rules of the road, the speed limits, those are things to take seriously to prevent these numbers from being as high as they are.
Foster wouldn't comment on the role transport trucks have played in the fatalities, but he does say it's important for everyone on the highway to leave a healthy amount of distance between vehicles, particularly heavier vehicles that are slower to stop.
While you're traveling at high rates of speed, you have very minimal time to react to something that could come your way.
Foster does say that some of the fatal accidents can be explained by an increase in impaired driving. He also notes that driver fatigue is a major factor in the region.
We have not a lot of stops in between towns, and quite often people are road tripping. Not saying the persons involved in these fatal collisions were road tripping. However, it's just another thing to keep in mind when you're driving such long distances like you do in our region, that driver fatigue can be a factor.
Foster adds that in 20% of traffic fatalities province-wide, the deceased were not wearing a seatbelt. He implores drivers in the region to take road safety seriously and always buckle up. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Air quality alerts are in effect for many areas in the Northwest. A statement from Environment Canada warns that forest fire smoke is causing high levels of air pollution in much of the region. The Weather Office is advising everyone to reduce their exposure to forest fire smoke as much as possible. According to the Ministry of Natural Resources, smoke in the region is likely coming from active fires in the Nipigon, Red Lake, and Sioux Lookout districts. They recommend using the website firesmoke.ca to keep track of changing conditions.
So the smoke impact on communities is affected by wind direction. So you would have to keep an eye on weather conditions to see what direction the wind is heading, and if the communities might be impacted. And it also depends on if the fires are exhibiting extreme fire behavior. So if there are fires that are exhibiting fire behavior, they will be putting off more smoke, which will contribute to the smoke that we are seeing in areas of the Northwest region.
The smoke continues to be a problem despite the rainfall that has helped manage the dozens of fires burning in the region. As of Friday, Bezubiak said no communities were being threatened by wildfires, but that the forest fire hazard remains extremely high and the restricted fire zone is still in effect. More than 100 firefighters from across Mexico arrived in Thunder Bay earlier this week. They were getting ready to help battle the dozens of forest fires burning throughout the province. As part of the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, the crews from Mexico have been preparing to fight fires all across the north by undergoing hands-on and in-class training at Lakehead University. The crews have been familiarizing themselves with the different types of Ontario firefighting equipment, learning how to use survival tools and simulating real-world scenarios. Because of the increased forest fire activity in the province, Fire Information Officer Allison Bezubiak says the crews will be sent to the most affected areas.
So Ontario is in that position right now where we are experiencing some increased fire activity, and we did put out the request for international assistance, and as a result of those mutual aid sharing agreements, we have received assistance from 103 wildland firefighting personnel from Mexico. But the plan is to dispatch the crews to the priority fires in both the Northwest region and the Northeast region where they're needed the most.
The Mexican fire crews left Thunder Bay on Thursday, headed to the front lines. More than 1,900 firefighters have been deployed across Canada this year. The landmark $10 billion Robinson-Huron Treaty Settlement announced last weekend is one of two parallel treaty annuity cases. The other will have major ramifications here in the Northwest as the Robinson Superior communities look towards a long-awaited resolution to their settlement. The tripartite agreement will see the federal and provincial governments each pay $5 billion to the 21 Robinson-Huron First Nations in the conclusion to a dispute that has been ongoing for nearly 150 years. Treaty annuity payments that were explicitly tied to value of resource extraction in the region had not been increased since 1875, where they were set at $4 a person per year. While those negotiations were taking place, the 12 Robinson Superior communities opted to take the issue to trial, and that matter is still working its way through the courts. Fort William is one of those First Nations, and Chief Michelle Solomon says while the Huron area settlement is precedent-setting in some respects, she notes there are too many differences in historic records to predict how the Superior area settlement will compare.
It creates a lot of excitement for the potential of change in community, change in your life. So, you know, as I said, when you are thinking about people who have had that marginalized experience to, you know, the idea of having, you know, some opportunities, new opportunities it's exciting.
Submissions in the trial that will determine the Robinson Superior settlement are set to wrap up in Sudbury. Closing arguments are expected to take place between September 6th and 18th here in Thunder Bay. Pikangikum First Nation should soon see its own members earning their teaching degrees and becoming teachers right at home. The First Nation will be hosting the Queen's University community-based Indigenous Teacher Education program. The agreement was formalized in Pikangikum, and Lee Noonan was there.
Pikangikum will be the first First Nation in the Northwest and the first remote community to host Queen's University's innovative teacher education degree. The MOU was signed during the community's high school graduation ceremony. Queen's Associate Dean of Teacher Education, Peter Chin, says the program is a game changer.
You can't be what you can't see. So the moment we can put First Nations, regional teachers in front of people, that's my cousin, then they can say, I can do it. And that's what changes things, right? And that's what helps change a community. In 5 years, this community will go from 80 Southern hires to almost entirely hired from locally.
Pikangikum has a very high level of Anishinaabemowin fluency, and for Chief Shirley Keeper, having the capacity to bring the language into the classroom is key.
We can have our children listen to their teacher in both languages, and they can have a better understanding, better concepts, instead of having to listen to English all the time.
Indigenous students are eligible to enter the program right out of high school. The hope is to recruit 15 to 20 students for the first term, starting this May.
Oh, I'm so really excited. If we, I can't imagine how many of our students will be enrolled in that program.
Students will graduate as fully accredited elementary teachers with a Bachelor's of Education from Queen's. They will only have to leave the community for 3 weeks out of the 2-year program and will be able to start teaching right after their first term. High school valedictorian Denzel Quill will be away for college when Pikangikum starts to see its first homegrown teachers, but he still feels strongly about the program.
Deep down, to me, I think it just means a lot, like a lot, if we had Aboriginal teachers here.
Chin hopes to keep rolling the program out in more First Nations.
Really, it boils down to whether or not I can get funding to run these programs, but I have many other First Nations in line. I'll be honest, Pikangikum, it showed up in my schedule and they came to Kingston, and a whole contingent said, we really need you here.
Applications open this September, and Dr. Chin says Pikangikum could see its first teachers working here in the school in September of 2024. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
After the break, we'll have more from Pikangikum and their largest ever high school graduation. Welcome back. And like we were saying before the break, the largest high school class in the history of Pikangikum First Nation received their diplomas during an emotional graduation ceremony. Lee Noonan has more.
Pikangikum's 2023 graduation ceremony saw a record high 41 students receive their high school diplomas.
It was a very huge day for us here in Pikangikum First Nations because we had a huge turnout of our graduates.
20 grade 12 grads were joined by a cohort of 21 adult students getting their diplomas through the Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition Program. Students like Geraldine Peters, who received her diploma in the same ceremony as her daughter Lakota.
She worked pretty hard. She had her struggles during the high school years, and that's why I'm so proud of her that she was able to accomplish, she was able to finish getting her diploma.
Like, I watched her work very hard. Like I've seen her work long hours and then do her PLAR work practices, and I'm just very happy to see her graduate today.
In a community where students face many barriers to education, graduation is a big deal. High school valedictorian Denzel Quill gave a heartfelt speech touching on the pride he feels towards his classmates, the struggles they all faced, and on the death of his best friend.
When I'm done crying, I just think about what they would want for me, and especially my bestest friend, Xander. He would have wanted me to continue to go to school.
Chief Keeper says that she was overwhelmed by the significance of the occasion and the support that came from all corners.
I'm very proud of all the graduates, and I'm very thankful we have such a good education team from the PLAR and from this beautiful school here. We have such good teachers. The things we accomplish, it doesn't take one person, it takes all of us.
Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Kiiwetinoong MPP Saul Mamakwa is calling for better runways and airports for the fly-in First Nations of northwestern Ontario, saying airports are lifelines for remote communities. Mamakwa was in Pikangikum First Nation recently, where he denounced the quality of runways in the region. He says larger aircraft simply can't take off from the 3,500-foot gravel runways that are typical in fly-in First Nations. He's concerned the issue could affect First Nations' capacity to evacuate in an emergency, and he wants Ottawa to invest in longer paved runways.
Imagine, a 6-ton vehicle going 160 kilometers per hour, on a gravel. That would not be allowed anywhere else, and I think that's important to the safety of the people that live here, the safety of the passengers. 200-300 feet makes a big difference. Sometimes you have 25 planes come into Pikangikum on a daily basis, so there's lots of traffic here.
Relying on smaller aircraft increases shipping costs for food and other essentials, says Mamakwa. He takes issue with the quality of the airports themselves. He wants Queen's Park to bring facilities up to a standard that would be acceptable elsewhere in the province. Ring of Fire Metals held an open house recently to showcase their new Thunder Bay office space. The company is currently working to push forward the Eagle's Nest mine project, which is one of the largest undeveloped nickel, copper, platinum, and palladium deposits in the world. The open house at the new location in the city offered an opportunity for leaders in Thunder Bay and area First Nations to stop by and speak with Ring of Fire representatives. CEO Kristen Straub says the new office promotes these kind of gatherings, which will be important moving forward.
We're quite comfortable in that space, but one of the big changes for us here is to have a much more open space area where we can have people that can stop by and drop in if they have questions, if they want to engage on the Eagle's Nest project development piece. We have a space now that can accommodate that, and it's a very welcoming space for people to come into.
Straub goes on to say the space is definitely an upgrade compared to their previous Thunder Bay office they've been operating out of since 2010. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was in Thunder Bay on Thursday to announce the party's latest housing proposition. The NDP wants to make some developments GST exempt with the goal of creating more affordable housing locally and across the country. Mike Lang reports.
We need to encourage and incentivize building more homes that people can afford. That's what we want to do. Ultimately, we need to build more homes quickly that more people can afford.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh referred to his call for more affordable housing as an investment that must be made.
Vacancy rates in Thunder Bay are at 1%. That means if you lose your home or if you've got to move, you're facing potentially being on the streets because there's simply no availability. And that should not be the way things are. We can't afford not to act.
By proposing a reduction in GST for developers, Singh hopes to create additional housing in cities like Thunder Bay that meets their definition of affordability, which is 80% of the average market rent. Singh also believes that a housing-first approach can also solve issues such as addictions and unemployment while providing a boost to local economies.
If people don't have a place to live, how can people come to the city? How can new workers come to the city? How can people come here and build a life if there's nowhere for people to rent, nowhere for people to live?
On the provincial level, local MPP Lise Vaugeois acknowledged the provincial government's efforts to reduce homelessness, but she adds that the middle class must be catered to as well.
I think it's important that there are incentives. I hope that this actually comes to pass. I'm still hoping that the provincial government will also then partner with the federal government so that there's funding for this middle level of housing.
We have to change the way the housing market is looked at, and that means a lot more non-market housing, looking at cooperatives and not-for-profit housing. It also means incentivizing private developers to build more. That's absolutely a part of the solution. That means ensuring we've got more rental, not just places for people to purchase, but people also need a place to rent.
Through conversations with Prime Minister Trudeau, Singh believes that incentives are the best way to pressure developers to create more affordable housing at 80% of the average market rental rate. Meanwhile, Vaugeois believes that underused buildings such as the Guiway on Court Street project right behind me, they could be prime real estate that could be turned into multiplex housing for those who need it most. Mike Lang, TBT News.
National Indigenous Peoples Day was celebrated nationwide and throughout the region on Wednesday, with guests and dignitaries from near and far joining the celebrations at Fort William First Nation. More on that after the break. Welcome back. Wednesday was National Indigenous Peoples Day, a day for all Canadians to celebrate the unique heritage and the contributions of Indigenous people. To commemorate the day, an event was held on Anemki-Waju, also known as Mount McKay, and featured a powwow, entertainment, and a feast. Jessica Clement reports.
About 1,000 people made their way to the top of Anemki-Waju to celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day with their friends, family, and community. The celebrations included a sunrise ceremony and a powwow with drummers and dancers. The event also saw dozens of booths with crafters, vendors, and community organizations. This is Fort William First Nations Chief Michelle Solomon's first major event as a chief, and she says she felt proud and humbled to be there.
I've been coming to powwow up here all my life. So, of course, you know, it looks a lot different up here from when I was a young person, but it is no less inviting, it is no less beautiful to be among the energy and, you know, the young people that are stepping into their Indigenous identity, some for the first time. It's beautiful.
Among the attendees were local politicians who all spoke about the importance of the day. The event also featured special guest, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who took the time to come out to Anemki-Waju while visiting the city. He says along with celebrating the day, it's also important to acknowledge the injustice Indigenous people have faced and to make a commitment to fight to remedy that injustice.
So that means ensuring that people have access to human rights like clean drinking water and housing, making sure people have shared economic prosperity, making sure that we're protecting the environment, and Indigenous people are partners moving forward with economic development, but a real collaborative partnership moving forward, which is better for everybody and ensures that there's shared prosperity and ensures that we protect the land as well. So those are some of the visions I have around celebrating today, but also remembering that there's also important work that needs to be done.
Dancer Tyrell Muniz came out to the event from Nescantaga First Nation. He says dancing in his regalia helps heal his spirit.
It helps me burn excess energy that I have, even if it's like emotions or feelings I've built in, like sadness or anger, and if I dance, I can express it. If I'm like over-exaggerating a turn in my dancing, it could almost be like letting out a way of anger.
The last few years since COVID, there's been a lot more people coming to powwows, which is really cool. Getting to see more people care about it and be around.
Jessica Clement, TBT News.
Meanwhile, over at Thunder Bay's Marina Park, the Red Sky Métis Independent Nation held their 6th annual Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. Around 200 kids from 3 local schools gathered at the Spirit Garden to learn about Métis culture. The children played games, learned about the fur trade, created Métis art while enjoying some burgers off the barbecue and tea by the fire pit. Red Sky Councillor Faith Bowles says the celebration is all about sharing Métis traditions from generation to generation.
They celebrate who we are because Métis people are two-world people. So we want the children to learn the old way, but they learn it in the new way as well. And we just need to celebrate that we were here in the 1800s or long before. We worked at the fur fort, you know, and we are the descendants that still want to carry on all our traditions.
It's important for to show everybody our culture, our customs, and so everybody can enjoy it. They always say if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going.
Delarond and Bowles encourage everyone in the community to join their celebration next year. That's all the time we have for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you right back here next week.